Welcome, Rabbi Joseph Polak, the head of the Massachusetts Beit Din and former head of the BU Hillel Rabbi, who we're here today to discuss. There's a lot of achievements and a lot of things you've done here in America, but we're here to discuss Yom HaShoah and your experience as a child born into the Holocaust and Holocaust survivor. So first of all, hello.
Shalom, shalom.
So if you can just fill me in terms of what you were born in 1943, if I'm not mistaken.
No,
What year?
I'm much older than that. I'm born in 1942.
Oh,
And I was born in The Hague, Holland, and taken to the Westerbork transit camp, which is a concentration camp in Holland, in the north of Holland, and from there to Bergen Belsen.
so that just is an astonishing thing to begin with, because to survive as a baby, not one concentration camp but two. How does that happen? So you went with your mother to the
My
first,
father.
and your father to Westerbork?
How much time do we have?
As much as you want.
I know we have time. How long is your program going to be?
So we're recording now, so I assume we can go on we usually go for 20-25 minutes.
Okay. So briefly, Westerbork is something that the Nazis called a transit camp, where people were sent, and from where the trains went to Auschwitz, Sobibor, Theresienstadt, and Bergen Belsen, over a period of about 2.5 years. Early 1940s, obviously, until well into 44. And by the end of 44, if I have my dates right, the Canadians and the British liberated this camp, this Westerbork transit camp. The transit camp was one of the most remarkable of all of the concentration camps because it was entirely one big illusion. Westerbork was meant to keep Holland's Jewish population calm and prepared to move on, and therefore no one there had a clue as to where the trains were headed.
Mm-hmm.
To the point that when a train got to one of the concentration camps, it never went directly there. It went to a point within 10 miles of the concentration camp, and then they boarded another train to take them directly, say, to Sobibor. And in Sobibor, you were dead within 3 hours. There was nothing there except a killing station. And most of my family was murdered in Sobibor. My mother and my father and I were taken to a Bergen Belsen.
After how long at Westerbork? How long?
Not long, 2 or 3 months.
Mm-hmm. And so you survived there as a newborn?
I survived there as a newborn, and I survived in Bergen Belsen as a toddler.
Wow.
Now, Bergen Belsen, in those days, in its early life, was made up of Jews who had what are called special passports and who were of interest to the Nazis as exchange possibilities for a post-war prisoner exchange.
Wow.
That was the people in, and so it was formally at the beginning not a prison camp, but just like a holding place for these prisoners who had special passports and special connections. And as a result of that, all the people that came to Bergen Belsen from its inception in 42 or thereabouts until it fell apart in 45. The people that came there, it was not really set up as a prison camp. You could wear your own clothes.
Mm-hmm.
And because you wore your own clothes, everybody wore clothes that had stars of David on them.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, the section of Bergen Belsen that we were in at that time became known as the Sternlager, or the Star Camp.
Wow. And do you have any memories? Because you were what, 2 or 3?
Yeah, somewhere in between. And so I have very few memories.
Mm-hmm.
What happens, a number of things happens to understand my Holocaust experience. By the end of the war, I would say around December 44, January 45, Germany really starts to understand that it's losing the war. And so it starts emptying all the bigger camps. It starts closing down Auschwitz. It starts closing down Majdanek. It starts closing down, and all the prisoners left in those places, which was still several 100,000 people, all those prisoners had to go somewhere. So many of them were sent to Bergen Belsen, so that by January 45, February 45, a camp like Bergen Belsen that was built for 10,000 Jews had 40,000, 50,000 Jews, with no increase in living facilities, no increase in food, no increase in drinking water, and most important of all, with respect to the fatalities, no increase in toilets.
Mm-hmm. And just
if you consider, I'll let you ask me any question you want. If you consider that the greatest symptom, the most visible symptom of typhus, which everybody had, was your inability to control your bowels, you can imagine why the critics and the historians later on started to understand the Nazi assault of the Jews as what they call the excremental assault.
Meaning a sort of an attempt to dehumanize people, and
the way they killed people was by defecating them to death.
By having them with typhus.
Yeah.
Wow. Now,
and you get typhus from stool. That's how it's transmitted. And if you're lying on the third tier of your barracks in Bergen Belsen and you suddenly get the call of nature, you don't have enough time. First of all, you're weak as anything to get to a toilet. And when you get to a toilet, there are 6 toilets for 1,000 people outside each barrack in a semicircle. And you can imagine. And you can imagine with 40,000 people that going on, how people are dying day after day after day. And there's no food. And at the end, no drinking water. There wasn't even food or drinking water for the staff, for the SS.
Now, it's quite extraordinary then for a baby to survive that. How did that, how was there forced labor? How did your mom carry you through 2.5 years of this?
In April 1945, the SS decided to empty the Star Camp and send everybody to a less valuable place, a less lethal place, and that was going to be Theresienstadt. So 3 trains left on 3 days in April April 8th, 9th, and 11th. The first train filled with 2,500 Jews, healthy Jews, sick Jews, mostly dead Jews. The first train is liberated by the Americans in near Berlin. The second train, made up mostly of Hungarians, makes it to Theresienstadt. The third train falls off the face of the earth, and for years and years and years, historians didn't know what happened to that train, and got known as the Lost Transport. The Lost Transport is the train that I was on with my mother and with my father.
Oh, wow.
There were 2,500 people on that train, and by the time the train gets to, by the time the train is liberated, which it is by, you ready for this? The Cossacks. The Cossacks.
You mean like a Soviet?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
A Soviet detachment made up almost entirely of Kosaken.
Wow.
They liberate our train in a small town in Germany, near the Polish border. The train, the Lost Transport train, traveled from Bergen Belsen to this small town, a border town in Germany called Tröbitz. And the train took 14 days to get there. My father died in Tröbitz. He's buried there. And I have driven it personally, the distance from Bergen Belsen to Tröbitz in under 4 hours. But the train took 14 days to get there. So what was it doing for 14 days? First of all, it was getting strafed by American airplanes. They thought we were a German army train, which we looked like. Mm-hmm. The second reason is the big T, typhus, was killing people left and right. And every time the train stopped, which it did a lot, to see if it could forage some food and so on, they had to clean the excrement from the train, and they had to bury the dead. And the Chevra Kadisha, the head of the Chevra Kadisha, is alive and well, and 98 or something like that, living on Kibbutz Shluchot in Israel. And I am in somewhat regular touch with him.
What's his name?
His name is Shlomo Samson.
But that, and the whole disappearing train and everything, that in and of itself is fascinating. But in terms of day-to-day work, is there any, either in Westerbork or Bergen Belsen, is there any kind of slave labor that your mother has to go through?
My mother was too fragile and too sick to do slave labor. But it was not a death camp. They weren't executing people in Bergen Belsen.
So she just sat with you in the barracks all day?
She sat with me, and that's when the Nissim v'Niflaos started. The way HaKadosh Baruch Hu took care of me is beyond dispute and almost hilarious, if it wasn't such a tragedy. But basically, my mother, there was an SS guard who took a shining to me. In Bergen Belsen. And as a result of this shining to me, he brought my mother every week, secretly, 2 bottles of milk. We were close friends with another woman who had one child with her, another child in hiding, and she was alone. Her husband was okay, but she was with this child, and this child in this Shomer Shabbos family. She worked in the bakery in Bergen Belsen, and she could bring home 2 loaves of bread a week. So she didn't need 2 loaves of bread, and my mother didn't need 2 bottles of milk. So they swapped every week a bottle of milk for a loaf of bread, and that's why I'm sitting and looking at your smiling face.
I mean, that's kind of unbelievable, mind-boggling. Were you able ever to connect either with this
Could not
SS guy or this
find this
woman?
guy. Could not. The woman, yeah, the woman moved like I did after the war to Montreal, and my mother and her stayed friends, and the family stayed friends.
Wow.
And
Do you
he
know?
is
Yeah.
also my friend who I played with. He's 3 or 4 years older than me, not more, but he remembers everything. And he remembers our playing together hide and seek. Around what? What was there in Bergen
In the
Belsen to play?
barracks.
No, corpses.
Oh my
Thousands
God.
upon thousands of corpses. You're not getting it.
Wow.
Bergen Belsen, when the British liberated Bergen Belsen in April 1945, they had to bury l'cheshbonam close to 40,000 or 30,000 bodies. That's what there was in Bergen Belsen.
And are you aware of other people in your age group who survived like that? Because that's meaning there were other babies.
600 children survived Bergen Belsen.
But anyone under the age of 3?
Yes.
Wow.
I can send you to From families in New York, where there's some twin girls. Yes, they were younger than me.
So it wasn't a slave labor camp as much as just people waiting around to either die or be liberated.
It was fine if you're gonna be. You know what they used to call it in the first camp. In Westerbork, Bergen Belsen was known as the Hilton.
Wow. Meaning compared to places like Auschwitz.
On Pesach 1943 or 44, I forget which, they baked matzah for the inmates in Bergen Belsen.
Wow, unbelievable. And this kind of story is definitely unusual because, again, it's you're there as a child. How do things play out once liberation comes around? Some people waited around in DP camps, others went on a faster route to Israel and North America.
2,500 people on our train. By the time the war is over, there are 2,000 people left.
Oh.
I'm going to give you some more numbers. Numbers are really important. There are about 2,000 people left. When we get to Tröbitz, this small town, that's where the train is liberated by the Russians. The Russians come in, take one look at the train, and they had to barf from what they saw.
Wow.
They then take all the people in the town. And by the way, never did a Jew live in Tröbitz.
Wow.
They threw all the people out of their houses and told us, go into the houses, take everything, live there as long as you want, as long as you need to. And they got medical help.
Wow.
But after all was told, there were 500 casualties from the train alone. And then many people actually in the town also caught typhus from us and died and were buried there.
Wow.
One of the victims in the town was my father.
So he survived all the way to liberation, but not, beyond.
Not so simple. You see, the people by the time the train was a third of the way to where it was supposed to be going in the middle of Germany, the Holocaust was over. Hitler was dead. The Allies had won. The stuff had been signed. The war was over, but not for our train. Nobody on our train knew that.
Wow.
So we were still victims of the Holocaust after the Holocaust was over.
Wow.
The train lands there, settles in this town in Tröbitz, and the big problem is burying the dead. And the townspeople got together and made a Jewish Beis HaChaim.
That's a cemetery.
A cemetery for the Jewish victims that died there. And that cemetery is standing to this day with an Natilas Yadayim cup so you can wash your hands when you leave it. And there are Gedolah Yisrael buried there.
Wow.
It's an amazing place. And the character of the town has changed. I mean, the town had 700 inhabitants. It was a small village.
Sorry.
A small village. And the people of the town to this day take pristine care of the Jewish cemetery. And everywhere in the town has become the town of the lost transport.
Wow. And
it has exhibits and teachings. And I just came back now. I gave a talk there, and you can see the talk on my website, josephpolak.com. Look, you'll see Tröbitz. That's the second talk that I gave there.
And I'll add the link to the video description.
Okay. So the other thing you have to know, I'll tell you the rest of my story, but I just want some of the figures to get in there. Holland, before the war, had something like 135,000 Jews. Holland, after the war, had about 10,000 Jews left.
Wow.
That is the highest percentage, not number, but the highest percentage of Jewish murders of any country in Western Europe. It's higher than Germany. It's higher than Poland. It's higher than the only country in all of Europe that had a higher percentage.
Lithuania.
Greece. No. Greece.
Well, Lithuania had 94%. I don't know what the...
I have to stick to Western Europe. You may be right. Western Europe.
Now, you had a very, very close relationship with Elie Wiesel, both of you at Boston University. How did that, if at all, add to your making sense of your childhood of the Holocaust, or did it make it more difficult? Did his thinking make it more difficult?
No.
Definitely as a rabbi.
Yeah. We study together every week for close to 30 years. And we had a deal that we were not going to talk about the Holocaust. And so we never talked about the Holocaust except every time we learned. And we found each other in that way. We talked through the theological issues very extensively and very deeply. And he was underneath a profoundly, seriously religious man who had his arguments with God. But one of his favorite stories, which he eventually made into a play, was in Auschwitz, and a group of Torah scholars got together outside of barracks one night and said, listen, we're going to make a trial, and we're going to put the Almighty into the docket to see if he is guilty of betraying his people and abandoning his people and all the usual litany of things. And then he said two things happened. Wow. They argued for a while, and they found him guilty. And then somebody said, okay, now we have to daven Maariv. And they did.
That is very typical of Elie Wiesel, because he himself was also, both practicing religiously and theologically, struggling with many things.
Outraged, yes.
you have a perspective that many people don't. You have the generational perspective, which unfortunately is not one that we have enough of at this day and age. You see the rise in anti-Semitism. You see people often saying, "Oh, this is the 1930s all over again." What's your perspective as a Holocaust survivor of what's happening now, specifically with American Jewry, but also in Europe? And are things as bad as we think they are, or worse, or better?
That's a very complicated and a very important question. I think that my core assertion here is that people really don't want to hear about the Holocaust. And so most people have not internalized it. Most people don't get it. And most people don't like horror. And the Holocaust is nothing if it isn't horror. And cannot, if you tell the story. I mean, when I speak to kids, which I'm going to do 4 times this week, I ask them, so you're a Gentile Dutchman who, shall we say, owns a dry cleaning store. Okay, and you live you operate in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood. I want to know. I ask those kids, what happens to all the suits and dresses that are at the dry cleaners that are never claimed? And I won't let them off the hook.
Wow.
I won't let them off the hook till they tell. And I want to know what happens to the Shabbos chicken left in the refrigerator because at 4 o'clock in the morning you're taken to Westerbork.
Yeah, I mean, all of the people who took possession of Jewish things were thrilled that the Jews shouldn't come back, and in cases that
Not
they did,
all,
they attacked them.
not all, and not everywhere. There were people that were outstanding
Yeah, no,
in
of course.
identifying and tracing, including the Quakers. The Quakers were
But
fabulous.
most were not. And
No. The Quakers, as a religion and a nation, went bent over backwards to help Jews and protect Jewish assets. They were outstanding.
Right. But you look, for example, I think they had a study in Belgium where a third of the general population thinks that what the Jews are doing today to the Palestinians is worse than what the Nazis did to the Jews.
Oh, okay.
And look, in general, there's this anxiety with the rise of, every year the ADL releases a new report where anti-Semitism is up by 20% or whatever it is, but it never goes down. It's always, it never cools off. And so I guess my question to you is, knowing what you know, what do you say about America today?
What I'm saying to you is that the Holocaust is not understood, and unless you have special teachers with a special curriculum that tells it as it is in ways that people can hear it, anti-Semitism will explode in community after community, and nothing will be different. Do I believe that the anti-Semites who are saying we don't want to be displaced by the Jews are going to come and shoot everybody down? I don't think so. I don't believe that. But I certainly believe that this poison of believing all that Hitler cooked up in his book and in his theorizing is believed by more people than you would imagine. And there were more people than you would imagine saying Jews have too much control and too much power. And if bad things happen to the country as a whole, that could be lethal for Jews. Yes, that I would say.
Now, you through your career, decades of as a Hillel rabbi, you knew many, many great people. I'm sometimes amazed at how eclectic the group of people you know are. So, if it's okay, I'll ask you a few of them and how the Holocaust impacted their lives. The first one is Shlomo Karlbach, whose family.
Before we talk about Shlomo, there's something else that I'm happy to talk to you about Shlomo, but I'm happy. There's something else I feel that should be said.
Mhm.
In the traditional Jewish community, we are now in the middle of the Sephira period, 49 days that we count, and during which time, at least 33 of those 49 days are practiced as days of mourning. And the reason that they're practiced as days of mourning every single day is because the students, according to our tradition, students of Rabbi Akiva, 25,000 of them at most, perished, as it turns out, from the croup. They coughed themselves to death. And the Talmud, the Agadic sources, let me put it that way, blame them directly, saying that this happened to them as a divine punishment because they did not respect each other. So on the one hand, it's a great teaching. So we are spending 33 or 49 days of the year mourning these 25,000 poor boys. And when I say we, I'm talking about the traditional community.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to ask the traditional community, how many days a year are you mourning my generation that didn't make it? And I'm talking about 1.5 million children, 1,500,000 children who were murdered. And they were too young. They were under 12 or 13 to be blamed for any bad behavior. Whatever happened cannot be attributed to them. And they were murdered, and by the most, I could get graphic here, but I have pity on your listeners. They were murdered in the most brutal ways. Even in the Warsaw Ghetto, where hundreds of thousands died of hunger, the first to die were the kids. All those pictures you've seen of the Warsaw Ghetto with kids lying on the ground are early pictures, because by the second half of that period, they were all dead. Now we have to understand that for the Holocaust, in the traditional community, with very little exception, there is not a single day that is spent remembering those children. Not a single day in the Jewish calendar. It's not there. And I think that the survivors are a humiliated group, and they have no sense that anyone gives a hoot or a holler about their humiliation. And the Orthodox community is no exception. And even
And what
when
do you
you
think
go,
they would like to see? What would they like to see?
they don't want to hear about it. It's too hard. And it is hard.
I mean, if you think about the rabbis in the immediate time after, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Satmar Rebbe, many rabbis whose families, Bells definitely, Tzanz Kosenberg, who literally lived through the camp, their major focus, maybe it was a coping mechanism, was to look forward. And none of those who I mentioned, who they all had family who was decimated.
Your logic is challengeable. That's not the logic. Is not. The logic has to come from Talmidei Rabbi Akiva. That's where the logic has to come from.
But I guess I'm returning the question to you. Why is it that these people, like the Klosenberger Rebbe, the Briskerov, people who lost their own families?
Klosenberger Rebbe talked about the Holocaust nonstop for the first 10 years. If you read his Divrei Torah, which are all published, he is referring to the Holocaust in every sikha. He can't get off the subject. And he probably never got off the subject. That's what he could do. And he did it. The Rav couldn't extrapolate it. He couldn't make any sense of it. He couldn't give a theological meaning. He just couldn't.
I mean, it's an event that the horror of it defies any ability to grasp it.
But the people that are dead need to be remembered. And it needs, for God's sake, it is the worst tragedy of any people in human history, so at least numbers-wise, if not brutality-wise. Nothing like it ever happened before, and hopefully it won't happen again, but nothing like it ever happened before. And it is the single most powerful catastrophe that ever happened in the history of humanity. And it happened to the Jewish people, and the observant Jews pay no attention to it.
Well,
they don't. They don't. When you go, I speak at these events, and the events, God bless them, are full with people age 50 and over.
Terrible.
So I'm asking, ladies and gentlemen, I just turned 80 years old. I don't know how much time the Almighty is going to give me. I'm pounding the tables. How about you?
Yeah, look, there's really no words. You look at like you said, it's between the numbers, the brutality. It's very, very hard to. It is by far the biggest tragedy in the history of our people.
So why don't we spend 5 minutes as a nation thinking about it?
It's heartbreaking. I mean, just speaking in my family, I found out that my great grandmother, Peshachaya Sapir, whose son was, I think you knew, my grandfather Bergen Belsen Poupko from Pittsburgh. Her sister and 8 children. Her sister was married to the Chafetz Chaim's grandson in Radin, right. And her name was.
Bernard Poupko went around talking Holocaust. He was, shaking up the crowds everywhere. He did it. He did it. But
just to speak of this, I didn't know until I was in my 30s and researched that I had a great aunt who was killed with her 8 children, and we ended up naming our daughter for her. And I wonder why didn't people speak about it so much? And I think, just from my own family and others, I think in many cases people just couldn't deal with it. They couldn't talk about it in a personal way. It was too much.
That makes all the survivors feel terrific.
Look, I mean, and you said it's not just the survivors; it's the 1.5 million children who got killed. And by the way, just to sort of loop back to Shlomo Carlebach, Shlomo Carlebach did a great deal to bring awareness to the Holocaust.
Yes.
And to the wide public, and at times that people didn't really talk about it. And I think the most famous, if you look at just history and pop culture, the moment that was sort of the big bang for this was the Eichmann trial, where for the first time there was a public discussion, and that for the first time you had survivors talking to cameras. Which, by the way, it's interesting. I interviewed someone who produced what's called the Eichmann tapes. They have these new tapes of Eichmann. And he said there were no televisions in Israel. So Israel had to bring in TV crews, which would show it to the world, because Israel had no TV. And for the first time, people got to speak. And even then, by the way, to me, one of the most horrifying parts.
I might remind you, was published in 1961, before the Eichmann trial, and people have started reading it. Raoul Hilberg's book, The Destruction of European Jewry, was also published in 1961. Do you know what Hilberg did?
No.
Hilberg, whom I knew, was a professor at the University of Vermont, and his office was not big enough for what he was doing. He had every train schedule from 1935 to 1945, every German train schedule. Wow. And he sorted them and sorted them and sorted them, and then came out with probably the most masterful description of the Holocaust ever written.
Wow.
Where everything is documented. Now, Shlomo was very Holocaust aware, that is true. And he talked about it, and he talked about the camps, and he talked about stories that he heard from survivors. Shlomo was a deeply beloved friend of mine. We taught together many, many times, all over the United States and Canada. I played with him, backup guitar, in all kinds of gigs that he had. He would call me when he was coming to a city, within 100 miles of me, and I would go and faithfully follow him. I also brought him all the Hasidic texts that he wanted for his teachings. I used to bring him like a pile of books like this to those sessions. Shlomo had an extraordinary mind, one of the great, great visionary Jews of his day. And the music, in its grandeur, in its rhythm, is once you sing it, is inescapable. And whatever Lashon Hara, the Jewish people care to repeat about him, they are from far not dropped. They are not dropping his music and not dropping his melodies.
Now, you mentioned the lack of remembrance in the Orthodox community. Thinking about Europe, when you see thousands and thousands of Jews living in Berlin and other cities in Germany, what are your thoughts? And does that show a kind of forgetfulness?
No. I mean, the Jews living in there are several thousand Jews living in Berlin and other parts of Germany. There aren't that many, but the ones that are substantially Russian expats. Then in Berlin, there is this phenomenon of Israelis coming there. And I've heard numbers between 25 and 35,000 Israelis living in Berlin at all times. And there is almost a shuttle train from Tel Aviv to Berlin that flies 2 or 3 nights a week.
Wow.
The other side of that is that the German society has done an extraordinary amount as repentance for what its forebears did. And they have internalized that repentance. An irony of ironies, the welcoming of 1.5 million Syrian and other refugees into Germany was directly repentance for the expulsions that took place during. They are. I mean, I've spoken to
it may have expressed repentance, but in no way was it what we would call a kapara. I mean, they may have.
That's so I asked them. No, they asked me, will you ever forgive us? And I replied to them, is it in your interest that I forgive you?
I mean, you can't forgive them.
And
nobody has the power. The dead people can't be brought back.
But the question is important. Question is, there's a subtlety here. The question is it in their interest to be forgiven? And they usually, most of the time, quiet down when I ask that question.
Wow. Wow. What are, we speak about all the bleakness and all the horror. What are some, I guess, inspirational messages that you can inspire us going forward in the challenges, whether it's, internal Jewish divides, the anti-Semitism we're experiencing? What are some lessons that a very unique form of Jewry, a form that we really didn't see? I don't think you saw either so much, the pre-Holocaust European Jew. What is some wisdom, resiliency, something that they are sort of speaking to us from their graves?
I would tell you unequivocally that they want to be remembered. More than anything else, they want to be remembered. And that requires, I mean, in Germany, I just heard about this. Some schools that expelled Jewish kids in the 30s and the 40s have gotten together the names and biographies of all the kids that were expelled and posted it in a very prominent, respectful place in the high schools. That's remembering.
Wow.
That's remembering. Jews don't spend 5 minutes remembering 6 million people, not 5 minutes. And I'm saying this with all the Yom HaShoah stuff notwithstanding. It's a drop in the bucket. It's not, I don't want to say it's nothing. I'm speaking at 4 of them in the next couple of days. It is important. I mean, I don't mean to minimize that, but in the larger picture, the victims of the Holocaust want to be remembered, at least like Talmidei Rabbi Akiva.
Wow.
They want to be, they are, they didn't do anything wrong. Certainly not the kids.
Yeah.
And the community, does Bells have a day of when they talk about the Shoah?
Not that I know.
Does Satmar have a day?
Well, tragically, they do. It's called Yom HaHatzalah, where he took the Kastner train, but that's another discussion. That's a madness. That's, in my opinion, one of the most insane things in the world.
I just figured out, Elchanan, in the last few months that I was at Bergen Belsen the same time he was.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. All right, Rabbi Joseph Polak, always an inspiration, and your book, The Bells Still Ring After the Holocaust, really speaking about your childhood and everything you've been through, really chronicles a lot of the story that we can't cover here in the limited amount of time, but is a great book, and I'll put a link to it in the video description.
You can also put a link if you can. Yeah, you can put a link to my website.
Okay. Yeah, I saw it.
.com.
Okay. Rabbi Polak,
Take care of
You're
yourself.
always an inspiration. Thank you so much. And I'm, I guess, tasked and invigorated in a way to follow what you're saying of making sure that all those many millions, much more than the students of Rabbi Akiva, are remembered and have a special place in our calendar, in our lives, and our memory.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Elchanan.
Thank you.
All the best.